All right. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. You know them, you love them. My guests, Joe Beecroft and Zach Burkes, team members over here at Predictable Profits. And we're coming to you with a topic that's been brought up quite a few times about sales plateaus and sales slumps and how to break from those. So before we get into today's content, I'm going to start with a little story. So, my son is training to be a professional race car driver. And in one of his races, he didn't finish as well as he had hoped to finish. And he got off the track and he was all bummed out. And I said, "What happened?" And he said, "The technician put the wrong sprocket on my cart. I could only go so far. He put the wrong sprocket." And I said, "Branson, with all due respect, if Max Verstappen was driving your cart, do you think he would have placed higher than you finished?" And he said, "Yeah, no, definitely." I said, "There are things you can control and there are things you can't control. But the thing you can control is getting as far as you can. So the lesson here is be better." And I say that because many times when we look at sales slumps, it's easy for us to turn around and say, well, it's the economy. Well, it's the industry. It's something other than for us to turn around, look internally, and saying, is our marketing doing the job that it should? Is our abilities to close, our sales team doing the job that we could? And then also the sales manager, which plays an integral part in overall sales performance. So, for the purpose of today's episode, let's just push aside this whole idea of the economy, of competitors, of all this other stuff, and let's focus on what it needs to be better. So, with all that being said, Zach, sales slumps. When I bring up sales slumps, sales plateaus, what are some of the things that come top of mind for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a few things that come to mind that stand out for me. I think there's three that really stand out to me. And of course, I'd love to get your thoughts on this and along with Joe. And we didn't rehearse or talk about this. So I'm going to put you guys on the spot a little bit. But number one, I think, is knowing your data before you can actually figure out what to do and how to do it or what's working, what's not working. I think you kind of have to look at what the data is telling you, either in your sessions, like the process, the messaging, all that stuff, right? So that's number one. Number two, like refining that sales process once you know what your data is. And that's like really, okay, we have these things now. We need to identify where potential clients might be falling off and looking for ways to optimize each stage. And then thirdly, the other thing that comes to mind are just kind of some re-engagement type of tactics or more tactical driven sort of things. Well, Joe is more of a data driven person than me, I think. So we can put him on the spot here. When I say like a sales plateau, knowing your data, what is something that comes to mind for you, Joe?
Well, you're right. We track metrics in sales in as great detail as possible, to be honest with you, because the numbers will and often do tell a story or tell you what you have going on, right? There was an example of working with a client the other day who believed they needed a new marketing source, but the level of leads coming in had not changed week on week. The quality had changed, and then a couple of processes were not being followed. So the next step was not being booked as much, but it wasn't a case that they needed a new company and more leads coming in the door, right? And metrics were the thing that we were able to look at over time to be able to tell those things and point those things out. I think often one of my favorite metrics in sales is tracking just how many deals you have in closing, right? And that's more of an emotion and a feeling than it is a driven metric on from a program. But that gives us always a great sense of, despite where we might be in terms of volume on the front end or the back end, we feel good about this many deals right now. And that's not always proven out by just having bigger numbers in the pipeline. So again, to your point, Zach, I think the metrics are always going to tell you a next level of detail about what it is you have going on. And you don't have to be an expert in data analysis to spot patterns and trends to be able to diagnose what it is that's going wrong in your sales.
Yeah, I think there's two things that stand out. And I'm going to ask Charlie for his thoughts on this, if you don't mind, Charlie. Number one, how many times do you think you've heard people say, like, I think this is what's happening? I think this is what's going on. And you're like, well, probably not, right? If you think that's what's happening, you don't know. There's a good chance that it isn't. When I wrote this down, I was not thinking about this, Joe, but you bring up a good point that I think sometimes people lose sight of, like, if I need to hit a certain number of like revenue, well, then I need to have X amount in my pipeline. Right. And so if we can assume that there's like a 25% conversion rate, then I need to have, quadruple that number of deals to hit my revenue, right? Or whatever the math is. So I wasn't thinking from that perspective. But when you say deals and closing, it is important. Like if you want to get through a plateau, sometimes you need more opportunities, right? You need to have more things in the hopper, and to be like, well, I'm not hitting my numbers and you only have 2 deals. I mean, that's probably why, right? But anyway, Charlie, I'm curious, number one, about the whole, like, I think this is what's happening and not. And then two, if you have any other thoughts around kind of like KPIs, metrics, things to track.
Yeah, we've long said that guesswork is a cancer of all business. If you're guessing, inevitably you're overlooking or stepping over opportunities that you need to take advantage of. So, highest performing people we know, our best performing clients, they know their numbers like this. You ask them a question, it's like, boom, I got it, I got it, I got it, because they're constantly finding out ways to optimize and instantly identifying when something goes wrong so they can fix it immediately. And we have this other saying that everything works and nothing works at the same time. And so, to piggyback off of what you guys said, if you've got a sales slump, you can go back and look at the things that people can control and the things that they can't control. Some of the things they can control, their activities. So the first thing we would look at is, are the sales reps doing the required activities that are necessary in order to drive the numbers? And many times you're going to find different gaps in the activities. And then you're going to look at the things that they can't control. Like you can't control somebody that is actually going to buy. Like you can't control that. You're not going to put them in a headlock and force their hand to sign a contract, but you can have influence over it. And so we have another client that runs a multi-million-dollar firm. And one of the things that he had said is, I don't know whether or not I've got the right person in the right seat because her performance isn't doing as well as it otherwise should. I said, well, let's start with, do you know that she's actually following the script as you have created it? Well, I don't know. And that was the first warning flag right off the bat, because as a sales manager, so in this case, it was the CEO acting as a sales manager. As a sales manager, he wasn't listening to any of the calls. So he had no idea if she was actually following the script exactly as it outlined. The moment he started listening to the calls, he's like, oh man, she's going way off track. So fixing the sales slump for him, he brought that to her attention, brought her back to the script, started following the script, and then they had, I think it was a record month already this month, just by making sure that the things that they should be doing, that they are doing. And one other thing that I want to add is that there should never be surprises in sales. You should never come to the end of the month and be like, damn, this is a surprise. I thought we were going to do this, or I thought we should do that. This is an advanced concept, which, we'll have to discuss at some other point, but it's all about sales velocity. And sales velocity tells you if a pipeline is healthy or not healthy based on the different stages of the pipeline, and knowing this is how many people should be in this stage because this is how long it takes from this stage to go to this stage, and this is how many people should be here. And you should know at which point in the sales pipeline that you're running a little bit light so that you can fix the issue right off the bat. But if you're not tracking it, you wait to the end of the month, then shame on you, I guess.
Yeah.
We've had it happen in the past where some people believe they're in a sales slump, but data would show them as it's probably not a sales slump. It's a fake slump. And I'll give you an example. Say a company sells 4 products every single month, right? And then for a period of time, they sell more than 4. They sell 8, 9, then 10, and then they drop down to 4 again, right? And they can't explain why because they don't track data, and they self-interpret that as a sales slump. But data would show you that if you track that consistently, those 3 months are the same every single year. What you've actually got is a seasonality that you've not failed to register, that you need to lean into more. And it's actually about the activities around the sales, the marketing and everything else that controls that sales cycle. And you're not in a sales slump. You're just failing to recognize the peaks in your data to show you a seasonality trend. And so I think, again, data always comes back to telling the story, not only on, Charlie, you're bang on right, on an activity basis for salespeople and day-to-day activity, but also in terms of just looking over time and being able to tell some sort of trends and being able to spot those and then lean in on them on the future to obviously expand those and maximize them more.
So to piggyback again on what you just said there, Zach had a conversation with us this morning, and Zach had said, hey, moving into October, we have to make sure we're running another Predictable Profits workshop, because those workshops are significant needle movers in terms of establishing more opportunities. This is where marketing and sales come back into alignment with one another. Zach, because he knows the sources of the deals in the pipeline, we make sure that we track all the sources. Zach can pinpoint at the end of every month, he could say, well, This month we had a number of people coming in from outbound in our market research campaign. We've had people come in from the workshops. We have people coming this and that. So the easiest way to scale business, do more of what's working, less of what's not. And so coming into the next month, right off the bat, Zach's like, we got to make sure we hit at least one workshop and maybe even two for that matter, just to bring in more opportunities.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just consistency, right? Why is this month worse than last month? Well, you stopped doing what was working. You didn't do it as well. And sometimes that's the case. Let's say you do have like a real sales plateau. Nothing's changed. Suddenly we're just not doing as well. I think it's really important that you not only leverage data, you do all the different things we've talked about, like activities, et cetera, get back to basics, right? And I think sometimes people get a little too complicated or complex in their efforts. And it's just like, we just need to do basics really well. I think sometimes if there is a real plateau, the added benefit of knowing your data and knowing what's happening is that you can understand if it's like an issue with the sales call itself. Is it perhaps a messaging problem now? Maybe the process has grown to be too like cumbersome. So there's just too much going on and we need to pare that down a little bit. So beyond just like what we've discussed so far, I think sometimes maybe there is a real thing that's like a bottleneck and just no way to solve for it. And you don't know what to change unless you do know that data, right? And so I think that was going to get into my next point, which we talked about with refining the sales process. But that's the other thing we see. If you don't know your data, people just start making changes kind of ad hoc. It's like, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. They don't know. And you're just tearing your process apart and you're throwing stuff against the wall and nothing's sticking. So then that's not, beneficial either.
It was a little controversial. I had a conversation the other day with somebody, guy's doing multi 8 figures, and he's trying to figure out, he wants to get to 100 million and so forth. And so I said, well, the first thing you have to do is get rid of your sales department. And this guy does B2B. And he goes, wait a minute, what? Get rid of the sales department? I said, see, here's the thing. Nowadays, all companies need to get rid of their sales department. Then there's this silence. And he's like, what does that mean? And I said, because prior to 2020, we had sales over here and we had marketing over here. What you need to do is create more of that unified business development type of division. Sales and marketing have to work in complete lockstep with one another. Marketing can provide sales with the follow-up, the sales enablement, and so forth. We know that consumption drives conversion. Sales has to report back to marketing. Here's the objections. Here's the concerns. Here's the ear on the ground. And they have to work in lockstep with one another. We can't look at them as totally separate departments working in silos. As traditional companies, the way that it operates, marketing creates a lead. They pass it over to sales and they go, well, I did my job. Forget about it. It's up to them to close it. That has to change. We have to now bring these teams together and they have to work in lockstep. I think that's also a really important thing that we're seeing, which is much different than where things were prior to 2020. And we see this ourselves. Marketing has a direct impact on sales.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. Joe, any last thoughts on leveraging data, knowing your data?
I would encourage people to not overcomplicate it. There is a million things you can track in anything, right? And sales in particular. But I would try and think about it as in, one, capturing daily activities, and that can be very simple, right? And then two, the fundamentals of what your sales process is, right? Just track how many calls you have, how many people move forward, your overall conversion. And as you start to track and become disciplined at tracking sales data, you'll want to track something else because you'll recognize the stories and the trends. And then you'll think, oh, wow, if I just also tracked open proposal rate, maybe that will tell me. And then all of a sudden you'll find yourself expanding upon them. So don't be overwhelmed by them. Start small, make it organic, start to track that over time. And you'll find yourself wanting to add metrics you'll be like us in like a year's time and you'll be tracking like 20 metrics per salesperson.
Right. That's a good point, Joe. And I think to give an example of that, because sometimes I think we can talk big picture and assume that people know what we're talking about. Let's say you have like a 2-step sales process. I'd want to see how many of the first calls you're having, how many are showing up, right? If you have a low show up rate, you'd want to be able to track that, how many are actually attending. From there, how many of them are going to that 45-minute session, and then how many are showing up, of course, and then how many convert. And that's just like a really simple basic thing. But if you don't even have that in place, you should probably start there. Let's say you have 4 calls, 3 plus a proposal, and then we discuss the proposal, or you go over a roadmap of the scope of work that you're going to do, whether you're building a brand or a website or something. Just start with simple process, tracking. As you say, that's a good shout, because sometimes we can talk big picture, but sometimes you just got to crystallize it.
What was the second part of your list now?
Yeah, it was going to be refining your sales process. So I think one of the quickest ways to break through a sales plateau is by refining your sales process. So I kind of already mentioned that earlier with like when you have sometimes there's a real plateau, things can change, the market can change. Look at 2020 COVID. A good example of that is Gong, which is a company that I really love. I love their tool, but I love a lot of the content they put out. They in like 2019, early 2020, before COVID, they were how to like help your sales team be better. They adjusted quickly to be like how to help your sales team be better remotely because everyone was working from home, right? And so they changed their messaging and their sales process to reflect the current state of the market. And so refining your sales process sometimes could be as simple as that. But I'm gonna like hand it over to you guys because I think a big part of our refining, our own internal refining, what we've done, we spent a lot of time kind of analyzing where people might be inadvertently falling off, dropping off. Maybe they're not emails, whatever's happening. But we also have tried to focus on building more consumption, right? And so I'll stop there because that's kind of you two or the consumption drives conversion. But when I think of refining our sales process, I think it's one thing that we've done to like, how do I get them to progressively become more aware of what we do and consuming what we do?
For me, to start with this concept at its most basic level, Zach, refining the basics to begin with, right? Because what we end up doing is because we're so deep in the levels of our pipeline and activities, we have to refine at a lot different level. But I think at a basic level, sales has always felt to me more like a discipline than it has been like a job to do, right? It's a discipline of you have to do certain things every day and show up the same every day. And if you stick to those and do them over time, and then of course measure them, you will ultimately do something. And generally that means sell. And for an example of that is like, we have a lot of LinkedIn activities where we go onto LinkedIn and we preheat and we follow people we like, we add comments. And that's only something and a strategy that works when it's done every day over time, right? It's not something you do one day when you're desperate and then another week when you've remembered. Like that's a part of daily sales activities. And that is more disciplined to do every day as a part of sales than anything. So I think there's a lot in sales that is a discipline more than it is just a job. And to refine the basics to me would be to one, have that basic checklist of, are we doing everything we know we're supposed to do on a daily basis as a discipline, right? Are we adding good notes into the system? Are we tracking our metrics? Are we making sure that we follow up with everybody who hasn't booked a call yet? Like all these things that we're supposed to do. And so I think the first level of refinement for me is like, are we doing what the discipline level of sales is needed to do? And then past that point, we can start to refine even more to take things that need improving or are missing and add those into the experience.
I also think that when we look at refining, the first question that you should be asking yourself is what's broken? Many times we refine because we're bored. But if it's working, like, why bother? The other thing is, if you're looking to refine it, you want to make sure that you have the data and to know what's working and what's not working so you understand the impact of your refinement. One of the things that we see quite often is that while refining your sales processes, oftentimes we sit there and we look at the script, and maybe it's a script that we have to refine, but it's also not having the right people in the right seat. I could get trained by Michael Jordan every day personally to play basketball, but no matter how great Michael Jordan is and how much time I spend with him, I'm never going to be able to dunk a ball. I'm built more like a Mack truck than I am like Joe and Zach, who have who could be much better at it. And salespeople, there are certain components of salespeople that really are born, so to speak. And so you may not have the right people in the right seat. And that's something that's going to be, very important. And whether or not you want to spend the time and the resources, bringing in the wrong person costs more than just the money that you're paying them in salary. It's all the opportunity costs that you're missing. Another component to think about is when you are refining the sales process, you want to do this very strategically. What is the framework that you're currently using for that sales process alone? That framework is critical because it's not just about like, let's put a whole bunch of words there and, try to sell people. Like you want to actually first develop a framework and then fill in the gaps in the framework. The framework might start with rapport and how are you establishing rapport? Then the next part of the framework might be, setting the stage or whatever that might be. So have that framework. And then when you're updating or refining the script, you want to refine it in chunks. So you want to refine different pieces of your framework just so you can understand what the impact is. Because it might only be one small section that is the problem. And you refine it, you say, what is the impact? Positive, negative, and then you move on. And then lastly, the only thing I want to add when it comes to refining the sales process is if you refine the sales process and you give it to your worst closer, that's not going to necessarily help things. What I like to do is if we refine the sales process, give it to your best closer and see what the impact is giving it to the best closer to see, you know, what's happening before you roll it out to the rest of the team. And many times the best closer just happens to be the founder, especially when we're talking about 7-figure businesses, low 8-figure businesses. Something to consider on that end.
Joe, I'm curious as it relates to like a sales plateau. Let's say I came to you, you have 2 weeks left in the month. You feel like you're not hitting your sales goals. Is there something that you would look to refine or improve first?
So absolutely. And to go back to, refining our daily discipline, I think nurturing is a massive part of that daily discipline of a salesperson, right? And so if there was a sales plateau, and just hypothetically say we could tell that the level of leads had not changed and our script had not changed, what had closed before had always closed, but we hit a sales plateau, then yeah, I would absolutely want to study those daily disciplines, which metrics could tell you on the nurturing of those leads. Because I think the nurturing, you kind of referenced it earlier, Zach, but ultimately in sales, all we're trying to do is push people further down a pipeline each time, right? Either with conversation with us or by a piece of content or a piece of marketing, right? And our responsibility in that is that nurturing side, and where we have to provide value, where we have to make sure that we're, ticking off all the roadblocks that the client has told us is preventing them from closing, all these things. And so if I had to do an audit from that standpoint, I would want to audit the nurturing side. And I think if you're doing the daily disciplines and that is not moving the needle, then we can start to talk about adding something different or changing something or refining it another way, right? And I think only if we can tell over time that we're doing the right thing and something strange is going on, only then would I probably resort to brand new strategies that we've never tried before, right? But that's kind of last ditch. But yeah, nurturing, I think, is the biggest thing to audit there.
This whole concept of refining also creates innovation. And there was a point in time where we experienced a bit of a sales slump. And that's when Zach came to the table and he was like, hey, I've got an idea that I want to run and I want to test with. And he was shaking up the offer. He wanted to basically create an offer that would take people that was on the fence, very interested, wanting to do things, that were highly qualified, represented our ideal clients, and just present them with an offer to sample, to taste, to experience the impact of what it's like working with us. So he made that offer, and I mean, my gosh, it was like over 2 days. I think it was a handful of more clients instantly. It was like boom, boom, boom.
And you're right, Charlie. In that audit, to use that as an example, Zach's data showed him that nothing had changed on the data front. The leads were still great, right? Everything should be working. The daily discipline and the daily activities, Zach has not changed in 3+ years that he's worked in the sales seat, right? And then he had exhausted all other nurturing possibilities to the point of, holy crap, the only thing left to do is innovate. And it was the perfect timing. And you're right, it absolutely worked. And we recovered what was our slump. But I think you have to go through those checks first before you innovate, right? Before that becomes the last resort. But to your point, that moment was so crucial to what then became the next evolution of our sales, right? So those moments can drive absolutely incredible change.
And one thing I will add to that is that when Zach first presented that idea to me, to be fair, I didn't like the idea. I told him I didn't think it was going to work, and I just didn't like the idea.
That's putting it mildly.
Yeah, but I mean, for those who are watching this, my t-shirt says results, right? One of the things that we've learned is that there are reasons and results. The only thing that matters are the results. And so when you have somebody on the team that comes to the table already with a certain level of experience and knowledge and whatnot, you have to respect that person enough to say, you know what? Look, I don't think it's going to work, but all I have is reasons. I have no data to back it up. So why don't we go ahead and test it? And then we'll go ahead and we'll see what happens. In this particular case, especially, I was wrong.
To Joe's point, I think what necessitated this or got us to this point was that the process hadn't changed. We tried a bunch of different things, right? And we went kind of through the list or checklist. And that's what I would encourage anyone listening to do. Don't just jump to like, I'm just going to throw out something new and like a new strategy or new offer that has no basis, but rather think about it. And I think we arrived, at least I had in my head, that like it was the messaging or the offer wasn't matching where those people were. So, you exhaust those other options first, obviously. Maybe it is a nurturing sequence that can be better. Maybe you can invite them to a workshop. You can invite them to when you're speaking. If you have a book, you could send one. If you don't, articles, whatever. But there are other steps you could take. But eventually, I think it was just that we're talking about refining. The messaging wasn't matching where they were at that moment, right? And I think that's like kind of as simple as I can make it. But I actually wanted to talk about something like that. So you kind of read off my notes a little bit, but that was for the third final thing. Unless there's anything else you guys want to talk about as it relates to data and kind of refining, I do want to kind of give you guys a chance to talk maybe about tactically as well, which you already did. I just asked you like, what would you do to refine? But if anything else comes up in terms of breaking through a sales plateau, because I think there's one that stands out to me, and Joe just kind of tagged me on a thread about it. But before I jump into that, any like tactics you might do, like, oh shoot, we really have to hit this, number. This is what we can do.
I'll rip through one of our favorites, and I won't steal your one, Zach. But one of our favorites to run is a 12 by 12, right? Charlie, in fact, I would butcher it. So I'm going to let you give the details of the 12 by 12. I know this is something we love to run and we've got fantastic results with. But if you're doing all those disciplines and you're looking for a strategy to innovate and create something new and a little bit of excitement, that is a marvelous strategy. What is the breakdown of that again, Charlie?
So it's a 12-hour campaign. It starts at 12 noon, ends at 12 midnight. It's a way to get people who are sort of on the fence to take action. It eliminates this idea of procrastination because they only have 12 hours. Usually send an email the day before, then 3 emails the day of at 12, 6, and 9 p.m. The way the emails are crafted or whatnot have to be done in such a way that they continue to build demand and desire. On average, across the board, with all the clients that have run the 12 by 12, I want to say it's about 200 and something $1,000 on average is what's been generated just because you're taking people, you're giving them a reason why and a super compelling offer. Maybe it's compelling financing. You might say 0% financing for the next 12 months. Maybe you're bundling something, whatever that might be. But yeah, the 12 by 12 is phenomenal.
On the 12 by 12, I have experience there. I used to run this with my first company. This is when I first met you, Charlie. I think I swiped this from you and Tom. And I would specifically, because we worked within the addiction space. And so there were obviously months in which, like, certain months were like prescription drug abuse prevention month, or it was this month, or whatever it was. And so we would time it to be like, today is National Tequila Day, right? But it would actually be like National Prescription Drug Abuse Prevention Day. And for that reason, only today, we're going to offer this package bundle, these two products that we typically sell separately together. Also, we're going to do it at a discounted rate because we want you to be able to help your community. Money is not going to be a factor here. Like, we don't want that to be a barrier to entry. We want to help as many people as possible. The outcome and the results were huge. That like would seriously, we'd be like, dude, what are we going to do this month? And if we were going to hit numbers, like, dude, F it, I'm going to run a 12 by 12, right? Like I'm going to do that. And we'd try to find some sort of reason to reach out. We'd reach out to past clients, all the different major organizations, the federal institutions, all sorts of different people, and run that. And we would make like $100,000 over a course of those 12 hours. And I'm not exaggerating. That was seriously one of our main strategies. So it's got to be a very specific thing. I have tequila, today's National Margarita Day. For that reason, we have this promo running. That's it, and then it's done. And so it feels like, oh, it's special, it's unique. And there is a reason why you're reaching out.
And for us, and a lot of those are in B2B, what you do is schedule an appointment with us by midnight tonight, and then we can extend the offer. Because, for a lot of people, for us, there's a reason why you can't go to the website and just pay to work with us on the website. Because, we are in the results business. We only accept clients that we're confident that we can grow and make a meaningful impact. And so for some of you requiring a phone call, then book a phone call. Otherwise, if you can send them directly to a purchase link, by all means.
The other thing we've done with similar like agencies, consulting firms, IT companies, is that they have this really large package, right? You work with us, it's $120,000 for the whole project. Makes a lot of sense. Some people might balk at it. I can't do that right now. You'd say, no problem. We'll do payment plan, right? And that's what you do for the 12 by 12. You're not discounting, you're just breaking it up and making it more palatable for that person to move forward. A lot of marketing agencies who have these really large project prices or quotes have had a lot of success with that.
Yeah, I think people undervalue quality follow-up. Just starting a conversation oftentimes is enough. Once you get somebody back in a conversation, you'll hear like, oh, I was thinking about you. We had a podcast not too long ago with Jerson, and Jerson was talking about how, he was doing really, really well with our outbound campaigns, and he was crushing it, feeling real happy and real confident, to the point where he got so confident that he got lazy and he stopped doing the preheating. He figured, I don't have to use LinkedIn Sales Navigator. I don't have to get all the retargeting ads and everything running. And his results immediately started to fall. He did everything else the way he always did it, but his results fell. And it wasn't until the audit that Joe talked about earlier that he realized he wasn't doing any of the preheating. When he brought it back in, things started to do really, really well. And so the preheating element, staying top of mind, the moment you turn a flame off of a boiling pot of water, the water immediately stops boiling and gets cooler. And so sales slumps are much easier to turn around when you make sure that your market continuously is being nurtured and that you still have that flame under the pot of boiling water to make sure that they're warm.
That's a good segue into my tactic I like to do. This could be a text message kind of thing. Could be calling, right? Like breaking from what you typically would do. So Dean Jackson coined this term of a 9-word email, and we've had a lot of success with that. Beyond just a 9-word email, it's re-engaging past clients and past prospects. I think sometimes that's we get so focused on new clients, right, that we forget that we have once had clients that we worked with, and for whatever reason, maybe the project ended, they left, whatever, things happen. It wasn't like a negative thing. It was just like they just didn't have any work at the time. Well, there is a trust factor there. You'd be surprised by how many clients you pick up just by going back to the well. Past clients, past prospects, people who maybe didn't move forward, but they were kind of interested at the time. Maybe you have a different offer for them at the moment. 9-word email is as simple as Charlie, you came to me and you were looking for, I don't know, some sort of plumbing thing. I would send it an email to you saying, Charlie, did you find a solution for problem X? Simple as that, right? And then you could say, no, I didn't, or yes, I did, or whatever. But maybe that would start a conversation. Yeah, I just always think re-engagement. If I'm hitting a plateau and I need to get to 2 deals by the end of the month, I'm going to look at past prospects and rather than trying to start something fresh.
And Zach, if I can quickly touch on our advice to anybody who is doing a pipeline management with regular follow-ups, I think sales plateaus are less likely if you can. I mean, our golden rule is never just follow up with asking, checking in, right? It's we always try
touching base.
Yeah, touching base. Have you made a decision? That's forbidden. We only follow up with value, right? Whether that's dropping them a podcast, sending them the book, saying that we had a module today and we thought of them, so we're sending them the training. Whether we saw an article online, there's always a piece of value in the follow-up. And over time, if you do that at scale, and it's actually not difficult if you put the right system in place, and if you can get away from just checking in or just following up, if you can do value-based follow-up at scale, you'll find that you will have less sales plateaus. And then when you do something like the 12 by 12 or the 9-word email, you'll generally get a better response because the perception of value is greater with you than it is with any other company, right? So I'd say that would be a keen part of that as well.
I really, really enjoy, and I just want to call this out, I love the idea of follow-up that's organic. So most of the people listening to this and those that we work with are going to be 1 million or more in revenue. So you have clients that you're working with that you're doing a good job for. When you have that success story, when you have something, even just a minor win, use that, leverage that, reach out to someone who has a similar business. I help so-and-so, just like you, get this. I thought it might be relevant to you. Are you currently doing this, right? If it's SEO, we do modules for our group program, right? For board of directors, whatever it is. But if you have that sort of success story or something that's relevant to them and it feels natural, organic, this made me think of you. Last time we talked, you were going through a sales plateau. I thought you might like this podcast, right? Now that's podcast inception. But in any case, that's normal. That's organic. That feels more valuable to be Joe, are you ready to buy yet? That's just not, no one's going to go for that.
Funny, last week I was actually wanting to follow up with a prospect, but I didn't have any content that I thought was going to be valuable. So I turned around and I wrote a LinkedIn post about her specific issue because I knew other people had a similar issue, because it gave me an excuse to follow up and say, I wrote this blog post inspired by our conversation, thought you might enjoy. It was just a nice way to keep the conversation going. But I know we're pushing up against the clock, and these guys have appointments on the calendar that we're going to have to jump for. So, my favorite question that I like to ask our guests is, what is your biggest, best tip for our listeners who want to take their business beyond 7 figures? And let's see, Joe, we'll get you started.
When it comes to dealing with wanting to go beyond 7 figures and avoid sales plateaus, I would say companies need to develop sales as a discipline and not just a job. It needs to be people who can live and breathe a discipline every day and understand what that means to do every day in and out and never falter. And I think if people can form not just salespeople, but a sales discipline type culture at their company, then they will scale a lot quicker and easier when it comes to sales and sales plateaus.
That's a really good one. Zach, you're up.
Yeah, along those lines, I would say just consistency. If you have 10 sales calls and all 10 of them are different, like wildly different, not just like, to that person and tailoring it, but like night and day different. One call you start with this, next one you do this, next thing is this, and you're just all over the map. You're going to have a very, very difficult time scaling that. It's going to be impossible. And so I'm not saying you need to be a robot and just do the same script every single time, but we need to have like, road markers or something in your call that at least you're hitting these things and they're kind of guiding you to have some consistency. That way you can ensure, to your point earlier, Charlie, you're following a script, you're not going off topic, then you can kind of catch yourself if you start to slip. But yeah, I think the consistency is really, really important in a sales process, whether it's the calls, the emails, the follow-up, just doing the same thing over and over and over. And it's really boring. People don't like that, but that's what gets results.
I love that. These guys took the words right out of my mouth. But if I was to add one more, how I started today's podcast, be better. And, there are so many different opportunities that exist in your business. Sales and marketing are arguably the most important elements of the business. You could have the best product, the best service in the entire world, but if nobody knows about it, or you haven't been able to convey the message well enough to get people to buy, then it actually really doesn't matter. So your business success is directly attributed to how well you are at marketing and sales. So, if you're not managing your salespeople, if you don't have a fully well-defined, articulated sales playbook, if you don't have your objections laid out and knowing how to handle, if you don't know what's going on with your pipeline, if you're not tracking the follow-ups and all that other fun stuff, it's like you're taking the most important part of your business and you're allowing it to operate at a substandard level. So, be better. Make sure that sales and marketing is fully dialed in and optimized, and you'll see your results perform at a much higher level. And on that note, if you are looking for additional tips, resources, and strategies to help you break out of those sales slumps and grow your business, check us out over at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. Covered a lot on sales slumps. I hope you enjoy it. This is going to be one of those podcasts that I wouldn't blame you if you listened to it twice. This is Charles Gaudette with my colleagues and friends, Zach Burke and Joe Beecroft, and we will see you in another episode.